Thank you, Campbell, and thank you, Commissioner Bell. And thank you, everybody, for coming along. And what I'm not going to do is run through every page of this or even all of the statistics, because I assume some of you are reading it now as I speak. Some of you may have read it beforehand because it has been released for a little while. And so what I'm really just going to do is highlight the big picture issues. As in the past, this report focuses on 5 areas of interest for us: the children's well-being, questions of crime and punishment, the general well-being of families and households through work and income, questions of social hazards such as consumption of alcohol, gambling and drug taking, and housing. Those 5 areas, plus the area of human trafficking, make up the focus of the work of the Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit. So those are the 5 areas we focus on. As in the past, we've stuck to 22 indicators across those 5 areas. There's a real tendency in this sort of work to actually add more indicators. It doesn't necessarily help you drive the vehicle any better having more dials on the dashboard. So we've really been careful not to expand the number of indicators. We've stuck at what we've got. As in the past too, we've adopted a 1 to 5 year time frame. What's happened over last year, what's happened over the last 5 years. Beyond that starts to get into arguments that the society has changed and things have moved on. So it's a medium and short-term focus. And as in the past too, we've added an assessment. Previously we've called it a report card, now we're calling it an assessment, and we provide a grade, an A to F grade, F not being very good. And I think too that one of the things that the Deputy Prime Minister latched on to, well we've got a C or plus, a C grade or better in 13 of the 22 indicators, so we've passed. And I'm not certain about that logic that if you get a bare pass in half the areas, that's a pass overall. Maybe that's a hangover from the days of school certificate, but it certainly wouldn't work in the era of NCEA, I expect. Anyway, let's move on. The first area is to do with the good news, and we think there's been some good news around early childhood education. This government picked up on a reality that was created by the previous government that despite the increased spending on ECE, children in poor communities and Māori children in particular were failing to gain access to ECE. And the reason for that was, in many cases, there weren't early childhood centres actually in the communities where these children lived. And this government has made a commitment to change that. I live in South Auckland and I see almost on a weekly basis new ECE centres setting up. So there is a response to that need, and we're seeing that, we believe, in improving rates of enrolment for Māori children. Albeit still that within the critical age group of 3 and 4, Māori enrolment rates are still around 70%, whereas those for non-Māori are around 100%. Still a big gap, but it's closing, and we're happy for that. In the area of crime and punishment, this is what we try to do is we get little snapshots of New Zealand's social history as told through mainly the New Zealand Herald. This is a picture of a young man who was in the gangs in South Auckland and served time in jail and is straightening his life out, and he got an award for that. And we think that's a sort of a good symbol of what seems to be happening in the sector of in the sphere of crime and justice. What we've witnessed to some extent is a decline both in rates of serious offending and also in prisoner numbers. For the first time in 20 years, the number of prisoners in our prisons has declined. Some of that was predictable in the sense of a changing demographic and ageing population, but some of it also suggests that the government is addressing some of the drivers of crime, in particular the causes of reoffending and re-imprisonment, and we've seen some minor improvements in that, which we find quite encouraging. One of the questions here, of course, is that one of the big drivers of violent crime in New Zealand has been domestic violence. There appears to have been some improvements in that, although there is also some evidence that police practice has changed. So we've got a question mark around whether those improvements are real or simply a measurement aberration. Next slide, please. One of the things that we've looked at is employment, and the fact that unemployment today is twice what it was 5 years ago. By any measure, unemployment's doubled in the last 5 years since the global financial crisis hit us. And in addition to that, 150,000 New Zealanders have gone to Australia. And no one, in our mind, no one seems to think that's a national That's an issue of national significance. That 150,000 people have simply left. That's a net result. That's not the numbers coming back because they can't get on a benefit or they find that Australia's not the promised land that they thought it was. That's the net loss. The population of our fourth biggest city has just disappeared. And don't seem to be worried about it. And in addition to that, unemployment's doubled since the global financial crisis, and we don't seem to be worried about it. And so for us, we're saying these are serious concerns which should be foremost in the minds of New Zealanders as they think about what sorts of public policies they need to take us forward. And in particular, there's the question of youth unemployment. In 2007, youth unemployment, that is for young people aged 15 to 19, was 12%. In 2011, according to the Household Labour Force survey, that unemployment rate had doubled to 24%, and this year it's 31%. It's a huge increase. And in addition to that, the number of young people is simply falling off the radar and not bothering even to think about work has risen. And that if you added that discouraged unemployment into the figures, you're getting a youth unemployment rate of 45 to 50%, which to a degree is the same as places like Portugal and Spain. Yet, it's not registering as an issue, and we believe it should. Child poverty is a deeply embedded problem now in our society, and the work that Campbell and others on the expert advisory group did for the Children's Commissioner, I think, identified some of the real difficulties we will have as a community in terms of reducing that. But the reality is that by the measures that we're using to see what's happening on a quarterly basis to child poverty, it's still stuck around that 21, 22%. And as Campbell has said, 17% of children are growing up in households without any paid employment whatsoever, not even a top-up on benefits. And we just think that sort of life is something that we can't tolerate and we should be working harder for. And the last area, the last bit of bad news is around housing. I appreciate now I'm not with an Auckland audience, so I have to temper my commentary here. But the reality is that in Auckland in particular, we've got a growing housing deficit. We calculate that to have been 16,000 houses over the last 5 years. There appears now to be an emerging housing boom in Auckland, and yet the Reserve Bank and the government to a degree are saying and doing nothing about it. We don't think that the idea that the housing boom will reinflate back to where it was in 2007 and 8 is a good idea, and we're suggesting that we simply can't sit on our hands and believe that the markets will rule, that there needs to be some level of intervention. So in summary, for our children, some mixed results, some good results around early childhood education and a decline in teenage pregnancies, which we believe are good indicators. No progress around child poverty, which is disappointing, and widening achievement gaps in NCEA Level 1 results, which might now transfer later on into other NCEA results, which for us is a critical shortcoming simply because those sorts of indicators are so essential for later success in life, and we're disappointed with that. In terms of crime and punishment, we believe there's some encouraging signs of some positive change. We think that those changes are preliminary, that they've only really just showing up, so we need to see what the longer term trends are. There may be some changes due to changing police practices, but it does appear to us that the government is placing greater emphasis on some of the underlying causes of offending, and we applaud them for that. In terms of work and income, there's a confusing picture of rising unemployment at the same time that benefit numbers are declining. And we think the failure to address youth unemployment, which has got worse, is frankly a disgrace. And lastly, social hazards, that's the areas of alcohol consumption, drug taking and gambling. Not a great deal of change there. We'll give that area a C, not because we think that the changes are great or not, we just simply think that there's been no changes. One of the concerns we have is the fact that there's not a lot of research happening around the harm that's caused by alcohol. ALAC has gone out of business, and we're a bit fearful that we won't actually have any great research on what New Zealanders' drinking habits and harmful drinking behaviours are. And if that happens, it becomes very difficult for us to talk about that harm in a sense of trying to influence, say, things like liquor licensing applications. And in terms of housing, the reinflation of the Auckland housing bubble and perhaps the housing bubbles elsewhere in New Zealand is for us a concern, and it deserves a bigger response. We think that the government's tactics of blaming Auckland Council for everything is a bit of a distraction and is wearing thin. That really there is a bigger question about what needs to be done, and it's not simply reforming the Resource Management Act, that there are other responses that are required. And finally, that the social housing reforms that are occurring within Housing New Zealand have proven to be problematic, that they are causing stress and dislocation amongst the communities affected by that. Whether those are good or bad is not going to address an underlying question that there simply is not enough affordable housing. So that's us. That's the analysis we offer tonight. It's more comprehensively offered in this report, and I'll hand it over to Richard Randerson, who is now going to be our MC for the rest of the evening. So thank you, Richard.